Hi, this is Brian Kim. I'm going to share with you episode number 14 in the Surgical Instrument Review Series, and I will be showcasing and highlighting the Epsilon P-1323, which is the titanium Kim double chopper for the double chop and cross chop technique. As you know, I developed the Kim double chopper for the double chop and cross chop technique several years ago, and the stainless steel version was developed with Katina, which has since been bought out by Corza. And Epsilon decided to develop a titanium version of the same chopper. It has the same dimensions. Again, it's a right angle chopper and it's about 2 millimeters long. And I like that longer chopper and a right angle to be able to hook the peripheral lens in order to effectively perform the double chop and cross chop technique. Remember, I like to utilize mechanical fracturing techniques to leverage the mechanical fracturing forces to be able to efficiently and effectively crush and separate the lens and disassemble the lens. So here is the chopper. You can see the blue color is reflecting the titanium. And the nice thing about titanium, it doesn't rust. And this is, again, the P-1323. You see it's got a textured handle, so you can grip it real nice. And I prefer a rounded handle because you can roll the handle within your fingers. You're able to control the chopper much more effectively. So you can redirect subtle nuanced maneuvers to effectively do the mechanical fracturing and the double chop and cross chop maneuver. Again, you can see it's a right angled chopper. There's also a cutting edge to the chopper on the inner side on the shaft of the chopper, and that's to help efficiently chop the lens. Again, it's 2 millimeters long, right angled, and you can see the tip is nice and smooth and round, which is very safe and capsule friendly. As you can see, this is the soft lens. I lift the incision with the chopper, go in with irrigation off to minimize decimase trauma, remove the surface epinuclear material, and I'm sliding the chopper leading with the edge under the rexus edge contra-incisionally, turning the phaco tip vertically sub-incisionally. You can see as I bring the instruments together, I'm kind of supinating my hand and I'm actually flattening it out. It's not actually quite vertical, but the chopper tip is pointed towards the phaco tip. I place the chopper around the right heminucleus, hooking the peripheral lens, and then fracturing the right heminucleus in half, using the chopper and crushing it against the phaco tip. Very carefully and efficiently disassembling that first quadrant. Rotating the lens piece, hooking the second quadrant up with the chopper, pulling it up out of the bag. And then rotating the second heminucleus in front of me, leading with the chopper tip, getting under the rexus edge, getting around the peripheral lens. Again, performing another cross chop maneuver, pulling the chopper centrally and crushing the lens against the phaco tip. Doing the same maneuver and breaking down that third quadrant, crushing it between the instruments and emulsifying the lens piece, and then once again doing the same thing for the fourth quadrant. Again, very efficient and safe and effective way to disassemble the lens using mechanical fracturing forces. Now this is for a 2+ dense lens, irrigating the surface of the eye, lifting the incision with the chopper, going in with irrigation off to minimize decimase trauma. Removing the surface epinuclear material, sliding under the rexus edge, leading with the tip, getting under the rexus edge, hooking the peripheral lens, and then positioning the phaco tip vertically sub-incisionally, bringing the instruments together, fracturing the lens in half. Performing the cross-chop maneuver, hooking the peripheral lens around the right heminucleus, pulling it centrally toward the phaco tip, and fracturing it against the phaco tip like a chopping block. Fracturing that first quadrant into smaller and smaller pieces. Loosening up the second quadrant, placing the chopper around the lens, again another cross-chop maneuver, hooking it from the periphery, and then crushing the lens against the phaco tip. And then using some vacuum to hold the lens piece, crushing it between the instruments, and then emulsifying the lens piece. Again, this is my preferred technique, using mechanical fracturing forces to crush the lens, not utilizing any ultrasonic energy or vacuum to disassemble the lens. Rotating the second heminucleus in front of me, placing the chopper around the lens, hooking the peripheral lens, pulling it centrally toward the phaco tip, crushing it against the phaco tip, and then doing the same maneuver around the third quadrant, crushing it, again, very safely and efficiently. And it all is predicated upon my ability to hook the peripheral lens with that long chopper. Again, a right-angled, long chopper, and that is why I developed that Kim double chopper. Very slowly and efficient. Again, I'm taking my time Very easy to disassemble the lens pieces. I use some vacuum to grab that last quadrant up out of the bag, get the chopper around the lens, hooking it from the periphery, and then crushing the lens with opposing forces, sandwiching the lens, flanking the lens with the instruments, and then carefully just breaking it down more and more. Using some vacuum to grab that last fragment up, and then getting the chopper around the lens, crushing the lens between the instruments, and then emulsifying the lens pieces. Again, very controlled, systematic way to leverage mechanical fracturing forces rather than ultrasonic energy. By doing it this way, I'm able to reduce the use of ultrasonic energy and vacuum. Thereby, I'm able to achieve clear corneas post-op day 1. And again, with the soft lens, the beauty of that is you're able to efficiently disassemble the lens without having to sculpt or groove, which is, again, a liability, in my opinion, when it comes to the soft lens. This is a 3+ dense lens. I lift the incision with a chopper, go in with irrigation off to minimize Descemet's trauma, remove the surface epinuclear material, turning the chopper so that I'm leading with the tip, sliding it under the rexus edge contra-incisionally, turning the phaco tip vertically sub-incisionally, bringing the instruments together, and I fracture the lens completely in half. Look how dense the lens is, but nonetheless, I'm able to fracture it very efficiently and very easily, getting all the way through and through with the double chop maneuver. I'm turning the lens 180 degrees just to make sure I get it completely fractured and separated. I place the chopper under the rexus edge one more time, and I'm performing another double chop technique. Again, making sure I fracture the lens through and through by turning the lens 180 degrees apart. I'm placing the chopper around the right heminucleus, hooking the peripheral lens, pulling it centered toward the phaco tip. By doing it this way, I'm able to fracture the lens through and through. Why? Because the chopper and the phaco tip are deep and at the same horizontal level as the densest part of the lens. And therefore, I'm able to effectively and directly fracture the densest part of the lens with the instruments. I place the chopper around that first quadrant, use some vacuum to lift that up a little bit, making sure I flank the lens completely in half, and then crushing the lens with another cross-chop maneuver, using mechanical fracturing forces to crush the lens into smaller and smaller pieces, and then emulsifying the lens pieces. Again, you can see this is a much denser lens piece than the previous 2+ lens piece. Because I rotated the lens, I was able to get that full thickness chop. You do worry about getting that posterior plate phenomenon with these denser lenses. You see, I'm now breaking down that second quadrant very easily. It did turn a little bit on me, but it doesn't affect the technique. I'm able to position the lens again because I'm just using mechanical fracturing forces and I'm not using any ultrasonic energy or vacuum. All I have to do is position the lens, flank the lens with the instruments, and then crush it and bisect it, and then keep bisecting the lens pieces over and over again until they're smaller, and then emulsifying the lens pieces. By doing it this way, I utilize less ultrasonic energy, and this helps me achieve clear corneas postoperatively. Turn that second heminucleus in front of me, placing the chopper around the lens, positioning the phaco tip deep within the bag, and crushing the lens completely in half. Doing the same thing around the third quadrant, crushing the lens again completely in half. Because I'm able to place the chopper deep, as well as the phaco tip deep, again, I'm not using any vacuum or ultrasonic energy. The phaco tip is essentially acting like a second chopper. That's why I call it a double chop. And then I'm able to very effectively and directly crush the densest part of the lens in half. And I just do this over and over again, utilizing and leveraging mechanical fracturing forces to crush the lens into smaller pieces, and then emulsifying the lens pieces. I really love doing cataract surgery this way. I have great control, and I use foot pedal control to modulate how much ultrasonic energy I use. Loosen the fourth quadrant now, and then positioning the instruments around the lens, crushing it over and over again. Again, flanking the lens around the densest part of the lens. And then once the lens pieces are small enough, grabbing it with some vacuum, crushing it some more, and then emulsifying the lens pieces. Again, I do use vacuum to position the lens piece. Once the pieces are small enough, I grab it and then crush it between the instruments, and then emulsifying the lens pieces. Very slow, methodical, and the bevel is always down when I do these techniques, and that does direct the ultrasonic energy towards the posterior capsule and not towards the corneal endothelium. All the fracturing maneuvers are at iris plane, away from the corneal endothelium as well. Now this is a small pupil. I lift the incision with a chopper, go in with irrigation off to minimize decimase trauma, removing the surface epinuclear material, sliding the chopper under the rexus edge contra-incisionally, the phaco-tip vertically sub-incisionally, fracturing the lens, bringing the instruments together, and fracturing the lens in half, placing the chopper around the right heminucleus, hooking the peripheral lens and pulling it centrally toward the phaco-tip, and fracturing the lens against the phaco-tip. Lifting the iris a little bit to access that first quadrant, and then grabbing it with some vacuum and emulsifying it. Using the chopper to just hook and lift that second quadrant up, and then carefully emulsifying the lens piece. Turning the second heminucleus in front of me, placing the chopper around the lens periphery, hooking the peripheral lens, and then crushing the lens against the phaco-tip with another cross-chop maneuver. That didn't quite work. I do it one more time, and I'm able to separate the lens in half. Using some vacuum to grab the third quadrant, lifting it up, and then getting the chopper around it, crushing the lens between the instruments, and then emulsifying the lens pieces. Again, using some vacuum to grab the last quadrant, lifting it up out of the bag, positioning the chopper around the lens piece, flanking the lens with the instruments, crushing the lens between the instruments, and then emulsifying the lens pieces. Very effective and efficient way to disassemble, in this case, a very small pupil as well as a soft lens, but mechanical fracturing does not depend upon pupil size. And so you can have a small pupil and you do not need to utilize iris hooks or rings. Because I'm able to position the instruments within the capsular bag and flank the lens with my instruments, I know exactly what I'm doing. I have no concerns about rupturing the bag or ripping the zonules, because I'm able to position the instruments within the bag and very effectively flank the lens and crush it between the instruments. And then this is the final case. This is the hypermature lens. And so in these cases, in order to bypass the posterior plate phenomenon, I don't go with direct double chop technique. I go ahead and sculpt a central groove, and I go about halfway, maybe a little bit more than halfway. I try not to go deep towards the posterior capsule. There's no need to do that. I don't want to have that risk. And then what I do, instead of performing double chop, I'm performing something called terminal chop. And that is when you place the chopper under the rexus edge contra-incisionally, just like I do with double chop. But since I've already created a groove, I'm just going to fracture the terminal edge. So again, on the contralateral side, the peripheral lens, which is again on the terminal side, that's why they call it like that. First, I'm going to go ahead and rotate this lens 180 degrees and get a nice long groove. Again, I'm sculpting under the sculpting setting. I rotate the bevel down. I place the chopper under the rexus edge contra-incisionally, and then I'm fracturing the terminal side, i.e. I'm fracturing the distal side, which is again through and through, which is involving the posterior lamella. But then by separating the lamella from the terminal side, and I'm involving the posterior lamella, I'm able to fracture the lens posteriorly. And this bypasses the dreaded posterior plate phenomenon. I place a chopper under the right heminucleus, hooking the peripheral lens, and then crushing the lens against the phaco-tip and breaking up the right heminucleus in half, and then performing another cross-chop maneuver, breaking up that first quadrant into smaller pieces, again crushing the lens between the instruments and leveraging mechanical fracturing to efficiently fracture the lens using the instruments alone without utilizing any ultrasonic energy or vacuum. I'm trying to turn that second quadrant around. It's still attached to the rest of the lens. I'm trying to separate it with the instruments. I place the chopper around the lens, hooking the peripheral lens and pulling it centrally toward the phaco-tip and crushing the lens against the phaco-tip, lifting that fragment up with some vacuum, and then again flanking and crushing the lens with the instruments, grabbing the lens pieces with some vacuum once more, and then emulsifying the lens pieces. Grabbing this fragment again with some vacuum, crushing the lens between the instruments, and then emulsifying the lens pieces. Turning the second heminucleus in front of me, sliding the chopper under the rexus edge, hooking the peripheral lens, positioning the chopper deep in the bag, crushing the lens completely in half. Again, because I have the instruments deep, I'm able to crush the lens at the densest part of the lens. That's why it's so effective. I perform the same cross-chop maneuver around the third quadrant, crushing and effectively disassembling the lens further and further. Once the lens is divided, I use some vacuum to grab the lens pieces and then emulsify the lens pieces, grabbing this piece again and then crushing it with the instruments first to break it up into smaller pieces and then emulsifying the lens piece. By breaking down the lens with mechanical fracturing forces, you're able to utilize less ultrasonic energy in vacuum, and this helps to reduce corneal damage and allows you to achieve clearer corneas post-operative day 1. Carefully trying to position this last quadrant around so I can get around the lens with the chopper because it was kind of rolling. Go ahead and place the chopper around the lens, hooking the peripheral lens, and then crushing it against the phaco tip with another cross-chop maneuver, using some vacuum to hold the lens pieces, and then crushing the lens with the instruments, breaking it down into smaller and smaller pieces, and then utilizing some ultrasonic energy and vacuum, pulsing it with ultrasonic energy, fluttering my foot pedal in order to strategically utilize ultrasonic energy throughout the disassembly of the lens pieces, and then removing the epinucleus. So again, this is the Epsilon P-1323, the titanium Kim double chopper for the double chop and cross chop technique. So I hope this was helpful to you, and I thank you for your attention.